Hi everyone, this is me and Ricardo again. We're back to work on a decentralized open source social media platform that we call Taarafu. Last time, Ricky and I were working on handling critical exceptions that may occur when your business logic is trying to communicate with an API. So we're building this portal side where we're trying to connect to the API, and maybe we run into issues that are not supposed to happen so often, but they do happen when your token have expired, you're not authorized or authenticated to communicate with this API, you run into issues with your request or any other possible issue. Someone played around with your configuration, they changed the configuration on your app service, and all of a sudden, your app service is not able to communicate with the server anymore. All of these things we account for because this is software craftsmanship. You have to account for all and every possible issues. And the beautiful thing about the code that we write here is that while we account for these, we don't let it create a noise that kind of confiscate and kind of, make it harder to see the business logic. And as usual, I'm joined with my dear friend here, Ricky. How are you, man?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. These shifts in daylight saving times is kind of crazy, but
Yeah.
I'm
I went. Did
oh
you
well,
guys
yeah.
shift too? Did you guys shift today as well, or?
Well, Puerto Rico doesn't have these kind of things, but it kind of affects other places
Yep,
around it.
everywhere
So
around your 5 o'clock becomes 6 o'clock somewhere else. Got
yeah.
it.
Well,
All
actually,
right.
we're usually like the early ones
There. Oh, you're they're usually there.
in some
Okay,
states.
gotcha.
So yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah,
Gotcha. We'll power through. That's the fun thing about pair programming.
yeah.
When you tell people we have paired on this project through thick and thin, you really mean it. Through the winter, through
Yeah.
the summer, through. All right. Anyways, okay, so let me jump real quick here. Let me share my screen real quick and go back to this foundation service that we've been working on. This foundation service, and the project is still foundation post remove by ID. Let's start with the obvious things, right? So we already did the validation piece. Now, our API may respond with other things that we consider to be a dependency validation exception, a dependency validation exception. Like what? Let's take them one by one. If I go back to the actual API, let me go into GitHub here real quick to just see what we have in our store. Let's take this guy here. Let's go to GitHub. Here it is.
They're they're basically two
There,
exceptions.
there are two of them, right? So if I go to Tarafu Core and I go to
Yeah.
controllers, here we go, controllers, and then I go to post controller and I go all the way down to our delete post by ID. So there is the post validation exception on not found post exception. So that's one we're going to need to take care of. And then the second one here is, the post validation exception was just the generic one that comes from, let's take care of these today. What do you think about that? Should we take care of these today? Let's do that. So let me jump back right back into the IDE, into Visual Studio real quick, and let's work on that today. So what kind of test do I need to write? I want to go and say, fact, here it is, public async task should throw dependency validation exception on remove if post is not found, right? And log it async. Okay, so this is the guy. So remember how we were doing the same thing. So because your API now is doing this kind of validation work, now things are getting a little bit more similar. Like you think you're working, like whether you're working on a back end or a front end, it doesn't matter because because the pattern is exactly the same. Like the patterns that you're working with are exactly the same. So let's just go here and say given when then, and then I'm gonna go here and say what do I want here? I want HTTP response not found exception,
Yeah.
right? So this is here new HTTP response not found exception. So remember how I told you the story about URL not found versus not found. So this is the not found one, and this guy takes in a response message. So let's just have some message in here. So this is here response message. So get random message, here it is. And then also I want response message, which is basically new response HTTP, I think, response message. Okay, and since this guy, the right side is not clear, I don't know what it is. I can't actually just type it like this. And then what? Let's see why this guy. Oh, because yeah, HTTP response message, just like this. Okay, my friend. So now I can take this guy and throw it in here because it's a requirement. And I can take this guy and throw it in here, which is the response message itself. So now I prepared the exception that's going to come out from the API. Okay. Now, what else do I want to do? I want to go here and say, here's the deal. This here looks a little, a little ugly. Why is that? Because, all of these steps here are just about as steps to create a simple HTTP response not found exception. That's really all that it is. It's not really doing anything other than that. So what do you think about, we'll come back to this later when we try to clean things up. For now, I just want to go ahead and say, not found post exception. So we need to have one in here that says not found post exception. Why do we need that, Ricardo? Why is that important? Because this is you kind of you're localizing the external exception that's coming from the API, and you're localizing it into a local exception that you can work with. Because if you let this guy be the inner exception of your dependency validation exception, what's going to happen is that when you need that guy downstream, you'll be working with external models, which means that if you end up in a situation where you don't want to use RESTful sends anymore and you want to use some other library and the other library has a different way of expressing these exceptions, this becomes a nightmare. Does that make sense? Right? So
Yeah.
this is how you're basically really detaching completely from that. So let's go down here. Let's go to let's create a simple exception here. Let's go here. Let's just say this. We're gonna say failed. Sorry, not found post exception. You can't see this because StreamYard doesn't know how to catch that one. I should probably tweet to them and tell them, hey guys, I can't catch this stuff. And then this guy inherits from exception, so that's okay. So that's this guy. And then we can go here, my friend, and say CTOR. Let's go up here and say this guy takes in a generic exception. That's okay. We can do that. And that's my inner exception.
Mhm.
Here we go. And then I can go here and say base not found post error occurred, right? Please try again, right? So that's this guy, and I'm going to take this out, and I'm going to do inner exception in here. I'm just going to put a message in here. So this is my message. There you go. And that's basically the post that I have. Okay, so that's not found post exception. I already localized. Now I need to categorize, right? I need a new kind of exception that's called post dependency validation exception. So we know that this is not something internal that we just need to go to the user and say, oh, some issue occurred. You don't need to worry about it. We're going to take care of it. No, this warrants an action from the user that's going to be working with us, right? So this post dependency validation exception I just took the validation exception and turned it into dependency validation exception. And this is post dependency validation error occurred. Please try again because this warrants an action, right? So please try again. So that's this guy. Please try again. Post dependency validation error occurred. Okay, perfect. All right, so what are we going to do here? I want to go down here and to my test, and I'm going to go and say, okay, this guy takes an HTTP response not found exception. HTTP response not found exception. That's okay. And then I want to go and say expected post dependency validation exception. So new post dependency validation exception that takes in not found post exception. Now let's fake an injury. Let's go here and say when I call this API, let's this up and let's go here and say broker. When I go and say delete post by ID, it is any ID because I really don't care. I just want the exception to happen. I can go here and say this guy throws a sync, right? The not found HTTP response not found exception. Is that right?
Yeah.
That's the story here.
Yeah.
And while I'm at it, I'm gonna go here and say some post ID because it doesn't really matter what it's doing. So I'm just gonna keep that way far at the top here because there's nothing else to say here. Okay, so there's this guy. Now let's go down here and say value task, right? And that's your post. Remove post by ID task, and this is the service. And I'm gonna go and say remove post by ID, some post ID. Okay. What that basically means is that I need to go here and await, and go and say assert throws async, right? And this is post dependency validation exception. I'm gonna go here and say remove post by ID task as task. Here we go. And then let's go here and say, okay, the API call has happened first. So I'm gonna verify that's my broker, and it's broker called in delete post by ID. It is any good, don't care here. And then let's go down here and say this is times once. See, now most of these things are familiar for you. You don't have
Yeah.
to, you already saw these things. You know exactly
Yeah.
what kind of idea we're trying to kind of illustrate here. So here's a broker, and then a broker dot log error. What do you think it is? Right? It
Any.
is
Yeah.
same exception
Oh,
as,
same
right?
exception. Right.
Yep,
Right.
yep, yep. Expected. So
Expected.
expected post dependency validation exception like this, and then this guy is times. Here we go, times once. Okay,
Once.
perfect. All right. So that's this guy. Let's fix this. There's always a missing something here or there. So let's get the mock. So the API was being called first, so this is done. And then the logging broker has been called first, so this is done. Okay, looks like a sweet test to me. Very straightforward. I created some post ID. I created the exception that will occur from the API, the localization, the categorization, the incident when it happens. And then I went in here and I said, let's verify that the dependence validation exception have happened. Let's validate that I called the API. Let's validate that I logged this thing, and it all
Mhm.
now good and dandy. Let's run this. Let's run this and see what happens. Here we go. Here we go. So it's running. RT is kind of a bad idea. It's kind of a debug kind of thing, but we'll give it a sec. There you go. Here's my failing test. And I might need to sync up because, so this guy here is saying I got HTTP response not found exception when I supposed to be receiving dependency validation exception. So this is a good test. So let me go here and mark this as fail, like this. And then let me sync up while I'm at it. So commit all and sync. Here it is. Let's do this. Let's make sure hopefully it doesn't conflict with anything. Here we go, here we go, here we go. Done. Okay, my friend, it's your turn. Take it from
Uh,
here.
Before
Huh.
that though, I
Yeah, go
kind of
ahead.
wanna go back to the code here.
Yeah,
I just noticed something interesting because I remember when you told me to make a failing test. Just I guess it would be the practice, right?
yep.
I'm kind of curious because the way I did it, like it was basically kind of like the way that we did the last failing test, where we used theory data, and
Oh,
then
this
we
one here?
used
Mm-hmm.
yeah and I basically listed like all the possible exceptions. Should kind
Right,
of like the same kind of.
right.
Is it fine to do it that way, or because
Mm-hmm.
I can see that this time you actually specify the not found exception instead of I guess in my case I just put an invalid post dependency validation exception. But I
Right.
guess
So,
yeah.
so because this one requires a little bit of a different treatment since we're gonna have to initiate not found post exception. So you
Mm,
localized on this one. On this one up here, we didn't localize. We basically went and said failed. And this fit all the three exceptions that we were calculating, right? Like since all of these three exceptions will be treated exactly the same, right?
mm,
All of them will be localized to failed post-dependency exception, right? But in
I
our
see.
case here, not found exception, it's the only exception that's going to come from the API that will be localized to not found post exception. This is the only one that will be localized to not found post exception. Everything
I
else
see.
is the same. The one that's invalid post exception that you just talked about, right? That's the one that we're gonna do next, and that one is gonna be very interesting. And I'm doing this on YouTube for the first time because we need to transcend the problem details, right? There's
Okay.
problem details package coming in with us. We can do it, in the next session or this session. We'll see how the time goes. But we need to transcend these problem details over to the next exception. So when that exception is moving forward like this, it's actually carrying with it the problem details onwards. So this is you are with me now on the kind of bleeding edge of standardizing moving forward with problem details. And at the end of the road, we're going to also run into a situation where, we need to display these problem details. How is that going to work? Right? So
Mm,
does that make sense? So the only reason why I did fact in here is because this is a specific case for a specific situation where we're throwing HTTP request not found exception. Does that make sense?
yeah, I think I can see it. Basically the ones are all related to only
Yes.
one type of exception. Okay.
Yeah, all of these get
Wow.
treated the same as a failed dependency exception, right? They
Mm,
all these three, they get treated exactly the same. But this one doesn't. This one communicates not found, and you'll see at the end of the road when we click, the remove post. Let's say you
mm,
have two accounts. Sorry, you have two web pages open, or you're on your Taarafu web app and there's a mobile app in front of you. Like you have a mobile app in your hand and there's a web app in front of you, right?
yeah.
Let's say now the post already rendered on the screen in front of you, right? Now let's
Mm,
say while you're looking at the mobile app, you deleted the post, but the post is still sitting there on the page because the page already rendered, right?
yeah.
Let's say you went on the page and tried to delete that post again.
Yeah. I see.
What's going to happen? The post is already deleted. This is when you and I get to sit there and determine, be like, should we go and say, oh, this post is already deleted and make a big scene? Or do we just go and say, oh, okay, we deleted it? We're going to need to determine what kind of
Yeah.
action we need to take, right? And
I see.
this, my friend, is where where design and user experience. I'm actually glad you asked me this question because there's something I want you to understand. Whatever I try to do, there are three aspects that we need to focus on in every software you build, whether it's back end, front end, is it the code, is it the UI? There are three things. Number one, you have to make sure that your code is satisfactory. You know what that means? You have to make sure that whatever you produce is satisfactory. What that basically means is that people who are using your software, people who are using your system, people who are reading your code needs to be happy and satisfied to work with your creation. That's number one. So that's spiritual. You're gonna have to think about, how can I make my stuff pretty and simple that people would be attracted to work with it, whether it's an engineer that's working with your code or a UI that's on the front end, that some use. So this is the first one, right? The second one in the software that you're trying to build, it has to be kind of it has to be thought provoking, like kind of gets people thinking, not in a riddle kind of way, but more of a way that basically helps people kind of, it's intuitive, it's easy, like they follow the same pattern. So in their
Mm,
minds, yeah, because the other form was like this, it's like consistency, right?
yeah.
Intuitiveness. And then the third one is the overall look and feel and the actions. The physical action, the physical implementation of your software. It has to be simple and easy, and people have to be able to look at it and be able to use it. So these three things merge in together, and they merge in really hard. And if you combine all of these together, you can build some great stuff. This is a secret sauce for any software out there that succeeds. Intuitive, easy, thought-provoking, something that's easy to work with. Does that make sense? All right.
Yeah.
It's your turn to make that test pass. Yay! Let's
Let me
do it.
just. Yeah. I'm gonna. I'll probably just. Yeah. I'll just undo the changes I have right now. Just give me a second here.
Mm-hmm.
That was a good practice for me. So.
Mm-hmm.
mm,
Uh-huh.
Okay.
There we go.
Just give me 1 second. Yeah. Let me just sync up. All right. Let's see if this is the right one. Yeah. All right. Let's run all the tests.
All right. Ah, is this guy gonna? Let's see.
Let's see. Hope not. Yeah, there we
Oh,
go.
no, no, no. This is going. This is good. This is good.
All right.
Yay! You have one failing test. That's perfect. Mm-hmm.
Expected, post
Mm-hmm.
inspection, actual. All right. Yep. Sounds about right. Okay. It will be this guy here. Implementation. So, larger truck cache. Yes. Implementation. All right. Fast response.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
critical ones are always usually the first ones.
Yeah,
Well,
because
structurals,
they are. Yep.
critical.
Yep. They're
Yeah.
the ones more likely to happen, right? Like, how are
Yeah.
you gonna receive a dependency validation if you can't communicate with the dependency? Just like how we did the SQL exception and all that good stuff. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This is the response
Yep. Yep. There you go.
exception.
Yep.
All right. Let's see. So, let's
Mm-hmm.
see. What was the exception called again? The localized one.
Mm-hmm. Not found.
Now found post, right?
Yep.
So, not found post exception. Not found exception. All right. And
Uh-huh.
then just throw create. Okay, I see we don't have the method for dependency validation. So
Yes,
just
we need to build that. Yes, that's
yep,
right.
create along dependency validation section. Post section.
Okay.
Just method and I need to change this to the exception. Dependency, no, actually post dependency validation section. And then go to yeah, that would be post dependency validation section.
Mm-hmm.
Post dependency validation section. Takes this and seeing that we have to use a generic exception, it has to be exception. Yeah.
Yep.
So do this, just call our dear friend Lucky Broker, just log the error, pass in the post dependency validation exception, and then return, right?
That's
We
right.
return post dependency validation exception.
Perfect. Yep,
All right,
that should do the trick. Let's do it. Let's run.
go to town.
Let's go to town. Let's make it rain.
Actually went smoothly. All right.
Nice. There you go. Perfect. Perfect. So submit this as a passing test and give me like, until tomorrow so I can kind of, prepare a couple of things for handling validation exceptions. Because I think, again, like I said to you, you reach the edge of the standard. We can very easily receive. Let me just explain the problem and let me tell you how we're going to solve it. The thing that we're trying to deal with here is basically you're passing in, you're getting this problem detail. The problem detail is basically, the dictionary, the data dictionary that you have. And this data dictionary has all these little details about why your request is invalid. Cool. Now, what happens now is that we want this to kind of get merged back in again into your invalid post exception. So it feels like nothing has happened. All that really happened is that the exception happened and was generated on the API side, but it still reaches out to the localized simple form that would happen even if you're communicating directly with a SQL or a database. So let me kind of tweak a couple of things for this one because I think what you and I are doing right now is what's really going to carry this forward. For the rest of the engineers that are working with us on open source projects. I should kind of make a quick tweak to exception library, to basically allow this kind of transcendence of information. I don't think I have that in there yet. Let's give it a quick look just to make sure. But I'm pretty sure, if you give me a second here, Ricardo, I'm pretty sure let's go down here. Let's go into this one. Let's go to GitHub. GitHub. Like ideally in the olden days, we would just display the overall generic message, but we're evolving, we're growing really fast, and things need to change a little bit faster than that. So let's see here. If I go and say exception library, so here's my library, and then if I go here and say, if you go into exceptions, if you go into the exception um, uh, uh, the exception model. So this guy takes a message and an inner exception. What I'm going to give it the power to do is that I want to give it also the power to take your data, that data dictionary that's coming from the outside world, so it can transcend that data from one place to the other. Does that make sense? Which basically is the core of the problem detail. That's what a problem detail is. Like if you go into RESTful sense over here, if you go into this RESTful sense library, you'll see that very, very clear. If I go into, let's go here real quick. Let's type in RESTful sense. Here we are. And if you go into RESTful sense folder, clients, not clients though, maybe exceptions. So let's go to models. And let's just pick up any one of these. So this is your object result. Okay, that's great. Let's go into services. Validation service. Here we are. So you'll see here some new pattern where it goes and says, give me the detail. See, it's carrying this HTTP response insufficient storage exception, takes in the response message, and then it takes in the problem details. What is it doing with these problem details? Let's take a look. So this is HTTP insufficient problem details. If I go down here into the models, and let's just see if we can have the overload for this one. This is not the exception. Where's the exception? Models, exception. There it is. Let's pick up any one of these. So look at this one. This one takes the details, problem details, right? And it pushes in the title and it adds the data back into that exception, which is amazing, right? Because now you can very easily just go and say, I want to transcend that data back into my model. Let me zoom in a little bit just so people understand. What this guy is doing is that the API already generated a validation problem details. We're taking these problem details, we're taking all these errors and mapping them back into a dictionary that belongs to this to this particular exception that we're in, right? What that basically means is that if you're getting a validation exception from the API, you'll see that data back. But now I want to transcend that. I want to transcend that onwards to exceptions itself. So our overload of exceptions will allow you to have something like give me the exception and give me the data inside that exception or in the inner exception of that exception so I can work with whatever I have in here. So let's connect
Okay.
tomorrow and see how we're gonna, it's gonna be great because I'm gonna roll out the library, the new upgrade, and
Yeah.
then we will be able to use it right away and test it in the real world. Does that make sense?
Sounds interesting. Yeah.
All right, my friend. We'll connect tomorrow. Thank you so very much. And thank you for your due diligence. This was fun, as usual. And we are getting that close. The only thing that's left is that we handle this validation exception, right? And then we handle the generic HTTP request. The things that are not critical. They're still dependency, but they're not critical exceptions, right? And then the last one is the service exception, and we're done with the foundation service. Then we go do the view service. Very, very easy. The view service is super quick. And then once you're done with the view service, we go actually and build some UI. We're going to kind of visualize a simple component, maybe list a bunch of posts, and then have three dots on them and then try to delete them. That's basically our North Star or end goal. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Alrighty. Thank you so much, Ricardo. Let's connect tomorrow. We'll talk to you later. Take care.
Take care.